Hello, everyone, and welcome back again to Solving Basketball. Today's episode is with Colgate assistant coach Dave Klatsky. We're going to get into his bio a little bit, which is pretty interesting, but thank you so much for coming on, Dave.
Of course, Jordan.
The first thing before we get into the stats or analytics side of your bio, you played at Penn, and now you're a current coach at Colgate. So anyone who's a player, well, I asked this to anyone regardless of if they're a player, but let's talk about that first. If we went to a gym right now and I went under the basket and you shot 100 free throws in a row, how many would you make?
So, Jordan, I'm a big fan of your podcast, and in preparation, I actually went out and shot 100 free throws in our gym. No, I'm just kidding. But I did shoot 10, and I made 8. So I would guess I'd make 81. That'd be my guess.
Okay, so 81. You said you went 8 out of 10. What were the circumstances behind the 8 out of 10? Were you warm at all, or was it like after a practice or a shoot around or something?
It was in pregame. Not pregame. Pre-practice. While our team was stretching, I grabbed the ball, shot a free throw, went and got it, came back. So it was a little tougher than somebody standing under the basket and rebounding for me. But I think I was a career probably 75% free throw shooter. So in a gym by myself, I think I could get somewhere near 80.
Yep. So you mentioned your career percentage. I looked that up, on a College Basketball Reference.
Oh boy.
The handy site here. Let's go through it by year. Your freshman year, you were 78%.
Okay.
Which is actually a career high. And then 77%, 70%, and 74%. So a career average of 75%, which I would imagine translates to at least 80 out of 100, I would think.
I would hope. That was a long time ago, but I think I could still get it done.
What is basketball? What is it? Is this basketball? Is that basketball? What is basketball?
So after Penn, I was looking at your bio and you worked in finance. So obviously there is a numbers aspect to that. And for listeners that don't know you, I've talked about your podcast on this podcast before, but you have you're the host of one called Stat Chat, where you have coaches. You've had a WNBA player, Sue Bird, coaches from all different levels, NBA, D1, D3, European, and talk about basketball and statistics really through the lens of a coach. So where did the numbers background come from? If finance is a big part of it, right?
Yeah, so I mean, my background, I did go to school and studied finance and accounting, and then went into Wall Street for 8 years. So my brain works in numbers, and obviously all that stuff is good, but my true love has always been basketball. And I think, especially early on when it wasn't as prevalent, I used to always look for, just data that could help further basketball or further my career or and just kind of see what led to winning, trying to figure that out in the early days. And I remember I was probably one of the first people on Ken Palm's site, and I probably read every article I could just about different things, the value of rebounds, the value of a shot, all those things quite early. And now there's so much data and research that it's almost like overload. But I've just always had a real interest in numbers. And so you combine my love for basketball with my ability to process numbers, and kind of just all came together, and that's kind of where the interest stemmed from. And now, obviously it's very popular, and I'm kind of right there with it.
And so from there, what was the idea, or when, I guess, was the idea to start the podcast? We were talking about before we started recording how hard it is in the season to do this kind of thing. So how did Stat Chat come to be?
All right, well, let's turn this into a little bit of an origins podcast as well. I like it. So basically, podcasts are starting to get popular, and I kind of always wanted to learn more. So I was kind of thinking about it, and I thought a really good way would be to kind of combine this idea of stats and kind of getting more in depth than the basics that I'd read or seen online. I know I loved whenever somebody statistical went on somebody else's podcast, and I was like, what if I just, kind of did my own and got these, people from different programs and how they use their stats and kind of just talk through it with them. And then I thought more about it, and I was like, this is actually a really good idea for a couple different reasons. And the best, which I didn't realize till after I started doing it, was it really gave me a chance to just talk hoops for 45 minutes with mainly my friends that are, pretty smart and do a lot of different things than I was personally doing. So I always wanted kind of a mentor, and this kind of made this podcast kind of turned into that type of thing where I didn't have a mentor, but I could just talk to different people on different teams and different levels and just pick their brain. Because how often, even when you're good friends with someone, do you really just sit for 45 minutes or, an hour and just talk numbers and hoops? Not very often. You might do an argument or talk a little bit or maybe put something together where you do it. But for me, it was that very beneficial. And I realized that after I did the first couple, I was like, oh man, I'm really learning a lot. And that was part of the reason I wanted to do it. It was just, one, for me to learn a lot. And two, I thought, if I wanted this, I'm sure there's other people out there that wanted it. And it seemed to, I have a very niche following, like I'm sure you do, but people love it. And I wish I could do more. It's just like you said, I get really busy during the season. Time is a resource there, and I just got to find time to get them in. But I do enjoy doing it. And then the second reason was just to kind of help my profile. Selfishly, I think anytime you can get your name out there as a and connect it to something, which for me was being a stat guy, and that kind of was the second reason to kind of continue on with it and do it, and hopefully people enjoy it, and it's helped them and it's helped me. So that's kind of the origin of it.
The other thing that I like to ask people that have podcasts, especially that are interviewing coaches, and like yours are in depth. How much prep goes into the guest in terms of what you're going to talk about and what you're going to dive into in that particular podcast?
Quite a bit, I would say. On the short answer. The long answer is early on, and we talked about this, when I wasn't as familiar with how to do it and what to ask and everything. I had a ton of prep work. I had questions lined up, and I knew we would tangent a lot, but depending on the guest, I always like to know what their strengths were and kind of listen to anything else or read anything else they've done and kind of figure out what they are experts at and go from there. And then from there, you learn a lot more about them, because most people, what you see online is only, part of the picture. So that's kind of everybody that I've talked to, I kind of learn a little bit about them. And like I said, most of the people on my show, I have some relationship with before I got them on. So I already know quite a bit about them. And from there, you can kind of talk more about stats and what they've done and and I probably already know how they've gotten to where they've gotten. So I can kind of use my knowledge of them to kind of further the conversation.
Yeah, I've had a very similar experience. The first episode I did was with Ken Pomeroy, and I had pages and pages of things written down, and it honestly went exactly how I planned. Like, we never, because I was so prepared, we never tangent at all. Like, I had everything planned out, and that's definitely not the case anymore. I mean, I still do a good amount of prep work, so we're going to kind of get into what we're talking about now. And I listened to your podcast with Mike from VCU. Is it Venezia? Is that how you say it?
Yep, Mike Venezia.
So you talked about a similar topic with him in that one. So, I listened to that, took down a few notes, but the prep work has definitely gotten less and less. So to get into that, the topic that I want to talk about is shot selection. And we've talked about it a little bit on the pod in the past, I think early on, but I feel like you have really good perspective, having been a longtime college assistant and also just being able to think numerically, I guess. So let's start out sort of high level generally. How do you guys, or, as a coach, how do you determine shot selection throughout the course of a season? So a player comes on campus, or it's the second year or the third year you've had them, and you have to evaluate what a player should or shouldn't be shooting.
Yeah, so there's a lot to shot selection, obviously, and just to give the listeners a little bit of background, Mike Venezia is currently at VCU. He's been under Shaka Tree now for probably 6 years. So something Shaka did, which I basically stole and kind of morphed into my own type thing, was they tracked every shot. And what they did is they did a 1 through 5 scale. Basically, a 5 was a layup, or, an open layup or wide open 3. 4, I think, was challenge 3 or tough layup. And then a 0 was a turnover. I believe a 1 might have been like a bad mid-range. A 2 might have been an open mid-range. And a 3, I believe, was somewhere in between, like, a challenge 3 that wasn't, a very challenge 3. And I think I'm not sure exactly what their scale is, but it was a little subjective, and obviously shot selection is always going to be a little bit like that. So I took that and I asked him, why would you use a scale of 1 through 5 when you can actually have pretty close to the actual values and figure out exactly what the expected value of the shot is? So this is where it gets a little nerdy, because you got to know a little bit about numbers. But so my scale is 0 through 3, and it's exactly what it sounds like. So, if you have a dunk, a wide open dunk, that's worth 2 points. So the expected value, you're going to make that probably 100% of the time. The expected value is a 2. If you take a wide open 3 and you're a 40% shooter, 4.4 times 3 is 1.2. So it gets a little bit complicated with the numbers. I understand that if you don't really understand numbers that well. But that's the scale that I currently use with our team. Obviously, a turnover is 0 because you have no chance of scoring a basket. So 0 to 3 is my scale. And I've now realized that with players, that's a little bit tricky, and we don't really talk about it with our players. But the 1 through 5 scale that multiple coaches that have listened to my pod have told me they're using now is kind of a good way to make it easier for players to understand, or coaches, because it's real easy to what I just said, and you can make your own scale of what's a 0, a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. But essentially, it's very easy there's no real math in that. Like, oh, it's a good shot, it's a 5. Oh, it's a bad shot, it's a 1. Whereas mine, it's like, all right, well, he just took a mid-range, challenge mid-range, and I'm giving it a 0.35. So 0.35 times 2 is a 0.7, right? That's a little bit more complicated than just being like, that's a 3 on the scale of 0 to 5. So I understand why they now use it, and it makes sense in talking to the players, but I still like the exactness of mine. And one of the questions I always get is, well, how do you know it's a 35% shot, the mid-range shot? And I'll give you the background of kind of where we came up with the numbers. But so you can go online and search for it, and I'm sure it's out there somewhere, easily to find. I just Googled shot matrix about 10 minutes ago in preparation for this and for the NBA, and it gives you all the percentage from basically every spot on the floor. So using that, you can see that the NBA players shoot around 40% from mid-range. So that's like a barometer that I use for our players and our opponents' players. if it's a wide open one, I'll jack that up a little bit. And if it's covered, I'll put it down a little bit. And if it's just a bad shooter, I'll put it down even more. So even if you're wrong, like let's say I say it's 35% and you're like, no, I think it's 40 to 45%. Well, the difference in that, a 0.7 versus a 0.9, at the end of the day, doesn't really make a big difference. You'd clearly rather have a fast break layup, which is going to be a 1.8 compared to those. So yes, they matter like 0.1, 0.2 difference, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter that much when you calculate everything. So I know that's a long answer there, and we can get into more detail based on the questions you have. But to go to your next question, which was how do you tell this to your players and how do you figure out shot selection? That one's a little bit trickier because I don't really talk about the math in depth with any of our players. I will say things like, if your foot's on the line, I'll be like, what do you think you shoot that at? And they'll be like, I don't know, on the 3-point line, that is. They'll be like, I'm a 40% shooter. I don't know, 40%. I'll be like, okay. Now, if you just step one step back, does it change your shot? And they'll be like, no. Like, all right, well, you have now an extra 0.4, or I don't say it like that. I'll be like, you have a chance to get 3 points instead of 2 points by just not even changing your shot. So, like, that's like the simple way to kind of talk about it with your players with math, not really using math. But what we do is we as coaches know the shots we want to get, and then we kind of structure our offense around that. So, you won't hear us being like, when a kid takes a shot, being like, that's a 1.1 or that's a 1.3. We'll just be like, that's a good shot or that's not a good shot. So that's kind of how it works with the players. You don't want to confuse them too much. You want them just playing and kind of have your offense dictate the shots that you're getting. So that's kind of how we work it in terms of shot selection amongst our team.
And so it sounds like it's not necessarily player specific, or is it? So if someone takes a wide open 3, are you assigning the same expected value for that shot regardless of how good the shooter is?
Yeah, that's everybody shoots a little differently. So if you're a bad shooter and you shoot a 3-pointer, you might be a 20% 3-point shooter. So yeah, you're getting a 0.6 as opposed to our best shooters that shoot 40 to 45%. They're getting 1.2s and 1.3s. So that's a big deal. And everyone knows their own percentage from 3 because the stats are all like, everyone knows what they shoot from 3 on the season or, in practice. Has a fair idea, I should say. And then some guys know exactly. So you can always, everything is player specific, time specific, defense specific. So yeah, it's very important who's shooting the shot, offense or defense, and that value changes based on who you are.
You mentioned the NBA baselines for these things, like by location and stuff. I think that one spot where it can get a little bit tricky is what I'm thinking of are post-ups and floaters, which are technically from spots on the court where you can take other types of shots. But at least in the NBA, it seems like post-ups are thought of as very inefficient, and floaters as well, as opposed to other shots that are taken in those locations. What I really want to get into the post-up. I just did a breakdown on Tennessee, and they have the number 2, or before the Kentucky game, they have the number 2 offense in the country right now, and are really post-up heavy. They don't take a lot of threes. They play a lot of bigs, and they're still efficient. And so, well, first of all, in your expected value system, what is for your best post players, if they take, let's say, like a contested hook shot, what value are you giving them?
Yeah, so post-ups are really interesting, I think, at this stage of basketball, because clearly everyone's gone away from, I shouldn't say everyone, a lot of people have gone away from posting up because, it was around a 0.7 or 0.8 expected value, and you can get better. But I think that I don't know how in-depth your analysis was, and I kind of want to do something like this in the off season. But there's different type post-ups, like you just said, and especially in the NBA and in college now too, with so many teams switching. Like, is that 0.7 or 0.8? I don't know if you got into this with the Tennessee. That's probably the overall number, but like if you get a switch and you have your 6'7" guy or 6'8" guy on 5'11" or 6'1", I find it hard to believe that that's still the same. So that's point number one. Point number two is like you said, Tennessee is probably one of the best in the country, and I don't really during the season know too much about the high majors, but I do know a lot about the Patriot League, and I did look this up before we started. And like Bucknell, who's in first in our league, is tremendous at posting up. So like their points per possession, according to Synergy, which isn't always exact, but it's probably 90% correct, they're getting 0.98 points per possession on post ups. That's really good, like for a half court offense. So and then like half of our league is over 0.85, which is not terrible. So so I think post-ups are kind of coming back in a little bit because nobody wants to double, and you just basically can dribble, get as close to the rim as you can and make a layup. So we have two bigs that post. Well, we have three bigs that post a lot this year, and they shoot. One of them shoots 65% from the floor, the other shoots 63, and the other shoots 57 or something like that. So they're good shots for us. They're good shots. So depending on the player, you can get to what we call the sweet spot, which is right in front of the hoop and do a little baby hook. That's like a 60% shot, so we want you taking that. I'll give that depending on if it's, badly defended or where you can just kind of do it like you're in practice. You'll get like a 1.2, 1.3, somewhere around that for a good post up. Now, if it's a little further out, it's the end of the shot clock and you got to rush, then it'll probably be a little lower. 0.9, maybe 1.0, but I think in this day and age, because everyone spreads the floor so much and everyone can shoot, the post-up, you have a lot of one-on-one opportunities where with the new rules where you can't really touch a guy, you can just back a guy in and get real close to the rim, and it's a really good shot. So I think as much as the post-game has kind of gone away, I think it's still really important to have guys that you can throw the ball into and just keep the defense a little bit honest and get that, 1.0 or better when you do so.
Yeah, so a couple of things to talk about there is the mid-range shot is in some ways the opposite of the post-up. I think they've both been viewed analytically as really inefficient, but defenses are trying, like at this point, most defenses are trying to take away the three and make you take a mid-range. And even with that, mid-range percentages still haven't gone up. Like you can only shoot so well on jumpers, even with the defense giving them up, basically. And the other part about a mid-range is there's no real upside to it. Like you can take a wide open one, and it's still not going to get to a really good expected value. On the other hand, a post-up, first of all, defenses still go at great lengths sometimes. You said more one-on-one in the post. I would agree with that. I was at New Mexico State last year, and we were in the WAC, and we had not the best shooting and pretty big size advantage, and we saw post doubles all the time. So it depends on the personnel of your team and the team against you. But the other thing about a post up is there's a ton of upside. So if we talk about a specific type of post up here, the rim run, UNC, Gonzaga, Tennessee, Michigan State, these high level, high major teams are obsessed with rim running. And that's for non-coaches listening to this, that's in transition, your five-man running to the rim and trying to seal or post up his man early in the offense. And you're not really shooting off of a rim run unless you've gotten that seal and you're about to take a really high percentage shot. And a mid-range doesn't really have that upside. And it's not just a rim run. just like Kansas is a team that they're driven off of seals. Everyone's trying to seal their man and basically lay the ball in the basket. So that upside, I don't think gets talked about enough with post ups. Like if you're taking, like you said, dribble, a guy has an arm bar on you and it's 7 feet from the hoop. Yeah, that's probably similar to taking mid range. What do you guys do in early offense? Are you rim running, or like a lot of teams are just drag screening now? Are you trying to get post ups early?
Yeah, so what you just said, I think, is really insightful, and it's something that our staff has talked about because you're so right. Like, just because the average might be something doesn't mean that when you get it, a good one, that, like you said, your upside of posting could be a dunk, which is,
Yes.
almost a perfect shot, whereas mid-range, there's no chance you're going to make every one. So, so we play a couple teams in our league that do that. The rim run to kind of just steal in the middle, and it's really hard to guard. It's really hard to guard against, and I think that's a really effective way. We do tell our bigs to rim run. We hardly ever get that play, probably because we don't stress it. It's probably a little bit on us. We do set more drag ball screens, 5-out ball screens. But the instructions for our big have always been rim run, look to get something quick. But we don't really get a whole lot of it. A couple teams in our league do. But we since we shoot it so well, that we really try and spread the floor and kind of, get it into the big, maybe after the fact, after the first ball screen or second ball screen. But yeah, in listening to you say that, you're absolutely right. I think your first option should always be, and I think that might skew the numbers. I think you probably, to do a correct study, would probably need to break it down to, a post up on the block versus a post up in the middle where you bury a guy and it's like any 6'8" guy can score when he catches it, in the restricted area, versus like actual post ups that are like traditional post ups that I'm thinking about, where you throw the ball in and it's 1-on-1 and you've got to make a move and score somehow. So that breakdown would be really interesting because, like, I know I'm preparing for Bucknell on Tuesday, and they do what you talked about, just rim run, turn around, and lob it up to them, and they catch it. They steal points, which anytime you can steal points in basketball, you're probably going to have a pretty good offense. So, I don't know. Was there a question in there? I forgot. Start rambling.
No, that's good. Tennessee, you've been watching Bucknell. I've been watching Tennessee, so they're both orange at least. But they do a little bit of both, of like these high upside post ups, but then also they just straight up duck you in, and they'll really try to hold it and get Grant Williams, who's one of the best players in the country, a touch. And then they'll run cross screens, which to me is somewhat similar to the rim running thing. Like, you can get a layup off of a cross screen. The larger picture in all of this is, I don't think this gets talked about a lot in offense. I'm not talking about early offense or late offense now, but in the middle of your offense, should you be trying to get like a perfect shot at the rim, or trying to get the 2 points or expected value in your system, or is trying to do that going to lead you to late clock situations? It's a pretty nuanced question, but how much do you think specific play actions to get shots versus flow to really move the ball?
Yeah, you can't be perfect. While we all want to get that perfect shot, you're running offense to get a really good look. And to me, when I say that, in my mind, that means anything over kind of a 1.0. Mm-hmm. So if you can get something over a 1.0, and it's all game specific too. So if the simple one is, you pass to someone who's open, someone's flying at you, they're a 35% shooter, and the one more pass is a 45% shooter. Well, yeah, 35% shooter, we're still over that 1.0, but I want the better one because we can get the better one. So there's so much to that question, because you want to get the best shot you can get whenever it is. So it's hard to say, let's work for the perfect shot. Let's work for the best shot. And if we get a good shot, we're taking it. Like, we're not going to give up a good shot because, as you know, or maybe we haven't talked about yet, but once you get under 8, if you just picture a graph of expected points versus shot clock, that thing trails off a lot at the end. So, starting with like 10 seconds, you're going to get a worse shot by the numbers by waiting. And especially the last 3 or 4 seconds, you're going to get a really bad shot. So you never want to give up a good shot at any point in the clock is kind of our theory. Now, our offense flows pretty well. We don't have many sets. They kind of free flow and play, and I think we can get into a little bit of that because one of the main things in this new generation is, okay, let's get threes, layups, and foul shots, right? I think everybody knows that. But is your offense getting you those shots? So you could play like the Rockets and have a James Harden and get those shots by just giving him the ball and saying, go to work. But in college basketball, and especially the Patriot League, that's not smart because you're going to end up with ISOs and shooting terrible shots. So our offense gets those shots, and it's been proven now. We've been first, third, second. We had one down year in the last 5 years where we were like 5th. But, right now we're first or second. Our offense has been one of the most consistent things over the last 5 years, and it's has all different players, but the system gets those shots. We shoot open threes, we get layups, and our guys really space the floor well. So for us, we talk about shot selection all the time. Like, what can we get? Let's get a good shot. And like I said, we won't be like, let's get a 1.2. We should say an open three is better than a challenge mid-range or something like that. Or, we're trying to force teams to get off the line and shoot mid-range. So let's not do that on purpose if we don't have to. The time of the clock matters a lot. If you're under 7, get a shot up because we're going to be crashing. So if it's 15 seconds left and you get the ball, we don't want you just going ISO. But if you get it with 7 or 6, well, now, go to work. Now you get to go to work. So those things really matter in the scope of your offense. And we practice every day on different spacing type things. So because we're so free flowing, you can't just be like, okay, keep your spacing and hope guys are going to figure it out. So I posted a little clip about a week ago in one of our games of a weak side action, and it was unscripted. And I can't tell you how many people were like, there's no way that was unscripted. I was like, it's unscripted in that we didn't know what was going to happen, and they probably didn't know what was going to happen, but it's an action that they've practiced hundreds of times in practice. So those actions lead them to be a little bit more comfortable in games, and it's hard to guard when you have weak side action off of a ball screen. So those type things can really help your program and your offense, I think, over the long run. And all that is based on what I talked about earlier of, is your offense getting you the shots that you want to be getting? Not as much like telling them the numbers behind it, but kind of getting the shots that you want the numbers to be is kind of the backwards way around that.
And so how about when you do get in the late clock situations, are you staying in that flow, or some teams, that's when inefficient shots can occur, partly because it has to, because you have to get a shot off, like you said, offensive rebounding, just get the ball up on the rim. If you have a really good post player, a lot of teams will throw the ball into the post with less than 8 seconds left. Or if you have a really good ball screen creator, a lot of teams will set a middle flat ball screen. So what do you guys do in late clock to try to maximize efficiency?
Well, one, we try not to get there.
Yep.
Like I said, you don't want to get to late clock. But of course you're going to, because we don't really want to force shots just because there's 15 seconds. You only want to force shots late. So we do a couple different things. We have right now, our point guard is terrific. So if we can get the ball in his hands late and kind of give him a ball screen or even let him go, he's going to probably create something, get a decent shot up. And that's if your spacing breaks down. A lot of times you're still just running offense under 7, and it just, something's going to free up like it did that it could have at 17. So we want to run offense, and then if it gets to the point where you got to make a play, you want the ball in the hands of the best guy that can make a play on your team. So for us right now, that's our point guard. But like I said, we also have some good post players. So if they do get the ball at 7, 6, they're going to work. They're trying to get a shot up. They're trying to get a bucket. And they're a little less efficient at that point, but it's still not a terrible shot if they can make it happen. So you really just want to get the ball at that point, I think, to your best playmaker and see what he can get done, and then always trying to get that offensive rebound because, points off of offensive rebounds are pretty high, and that's going to be another way to kind of steal points.
And that goes back to another value of the post-up that you don't get from the mid-range. Having players on the floor that can really only post up in some cases, or I guess roll to the rim would be another way to incorporate in a big that can't really shoot with limited ball skills. Usually those players are really good at offensive rebounding and protecting the rim. Whereas like mid-range, there's no obvious, it can differ depending on the player, but there's no obvious trade-off that you're getting something out of having a mid-range heavy type of player. And chances are they could probably, like you said, they're shooting a foot on the line. Is it really going to change their shot if they're going a step back? But the points per shot and the expected value, it's really important to do what you do with to know exactly how much or to quantify what each shot is. But at least with the post-ups and with playing bigs, there is later, maybe on defense or maybe after that shot is getting to the rim, you are getting better expected value later on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I want to touch on something that you just said on the why. So a lot of people ask me, like, who cares? Like, so you do the expected value of each shot. Who cares? Right? Like, oh, okay, you got a number now. My answer to that is I think that you get a better feel of where your team is at based on what the expected score should have been rather than the actual score. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you an example. We played Cornell early in the year, and they scored 59 points on us. And the expected value had them at 80. So while we thought we played a really good defensive game, the reality was they shot, I don't remember exactly what they shot, but they must have shot like 3 of 23 from 3 or something like that. And probably 16 of them were wide open by okay shooters, not by like drop dead shooters. But so all of a sudden you're looking at your team, you're like, all right, we're playing great. We just beat Cornell on the road. We held them to 59. And then you watch the film, or you can do it live if you have enough people. You're in reflection. It's like, oh, wait a minute. They crushed us. We gave up so many easy looks that we can't be like, we're in a good spot. We have to realize that we're going to lose that game a lot of the time. So let's adjust our defense or figure out where we went wrong so we can adjust. So those are the reasons I think, and it happens all the time where you think you play well or you think you played bad, or you got blown out, and then you look at the shots you got and you're like, we didn't make shots. So over the long run, we're not playing as bad as we did in that game. So let's not reinvent the wheel, crush our guys. Let's just kind of keep doing the same thing. And over time, that number is going to be the number that you want it to be. Where, in math, and, I think I asked this of Ken Palm when I saw him, or maybe I emailed him, but I asked him if he felt like there were more comebacks, like people getting up 15 to 20 points and seeing more comebacks. And I think he didn't do a study on it, but he agreed that it's probably so because there's more threes being taken, and people just, the variance of threes is going to be, you might go 0 for 8 and be a good shooter and then come back and go 6 of 7. So that right there is going to be a 15-point swing probably in the course of the game. So that's one of the main reasons I do it, is to kind of get a better picture of where we stand as a team rather than the actual. It's the simple answer is it's more process than results is kind of the main reason I do it.
Yeah. And a lot of people, when I get questions about stats or analytics, they want to really dive into basketball specific stuff and like reading basketball on paper or nylon calculus or Ken's work is great for that. But there's also value, and I can tell based on your background that you have it in literally just understanding how numbers, probability, and variance work. This is not specific to basketball as much as it is decision making. So it doesn't really fit into the coaching worldview, but even in something like your ball screen coverage, there's variance in that.
Yep.
As a coach, you have to hold your players accountable for every mistake, but a player isn't going to be in the right spot to ice every single time, or whatever your ball screen coverage is. And shooting is the one spot where I feel like everyone can agree. Like a 40% shooter doesn't always shoot 40% in when he shoots 10 of them or something like that.
Right.
But there's variance in offensive rebounding. I don't know, how do you think that can fit into a coach's, obviously accountability is key in coaching, but maybe it's just in the back of your mind understanding how variance works as opposed to like discussing it with your team?
Yeah, well, I think decision making is so important, and you base decisions on something. So I'm a numbers guy. I base my decisions on the probability of something happening. So that's kind of what I think everyone should do, because I'm a numbers guy. I understand that not everyone's mind is as weird as mine and does that. So you may base decisions on your intuition or other things like that, and that's fine. Sometimes your intuition's right, but the math doesn't lie. Like, the math is not really ever wrong, but that doesn't mean that your decision isn't going to be wrong, like you said. That's kind of, I think as coaches, you're always trying to make the best decision, and you make decisions based on the data available and the information available. So if you have numbers that can back it up, then yeah, it makes sense. If you're just kind of guessing and going by intuition or changing stuff because it didn't work even if it didn't work for 10 games, but that the math says over the long run it's going to work, it's going to work. So it's one of those things that you just gotta kind of stick with. And another example on the opposite side of that was early in the year, we were holding teams to under 30% 3-point shooting, and we would have arguments in our office, and I was like, ain't gonna last, because there was nothing that we were doing differently. We were just getting a little lucky. We were getting a little lucky that teams were missing against us, and obviously with Ken Palm's data, and I think John Gassaway did a good study on that. Like, the probability that it's going to go up is very high based on the last 20 years, unless you're one of like 5 teams, or unless there's a reason. And sure enough, now in league, teams are shooting close to 38% against us. So it's one of those things that work the opposite, but it can work for you too. Like, if teams are shooting 40% against you early, and you're like, man, we got to switch everything up. No, if you're trying to run people up the line and they're making tough threes, just stick with it. It's over the long run, it'll even itself out, and you can make the decision that is the correct one, rather than rush to judgment on small data samples.
Let's say you play Bucknell and you give up 50% of your offensive rebounds in that game, and so I think people who might not be data oriented would say, okay, we gave up 50% of our offensive rebounds. The numbers, the analytics, they say we need to make a change the next time that we play Bucknell. And that could be the case. But the more nuanced, the larger conversation is that 50% predictive of the next game? And so we see that in shooting. We can understand the luck or not in shooting. But in rebounding, there's things that can happen too. You can box your guy out and the ball just bounces a certain way. And that can happen over the course of the game where your process was right, but your results weren't. From a coaching perspective, you want to hold your players accountable. You want to tell them that they need to box out better or focus on boxing out. But then you also have a larger decision to make beyond just what you're telling your players. do I play the next time we play Bucknell, do we go bigger or something like that?
Yeah, I think what you said is leads me into a really important point that I'm glad you brought up, because having played basketball, I don't want it to seem like all me and our staff and anybody who's a numbers guy does, or maybe other people do this, but it's just the numbers say this, we got unlucky because they're only 30% offensive rebound, they got 50. No. Like, what you're doing is you're always trying to figure out the why. So you will then watch film, and having played, I know what a good box out is compared to I guess it doesn't matter if you've played. You know what a good box out is compared to a bad box out. The effort that you gave, if the ball was in your hands, did you get unlucky? So sometimes, like you said, you might have done everything perfect, and the ball, like, you boxed perfect, and the ball took a bounce out. So you were going to get 80% of the misses, and 20% you have no chance of getting. Well, you're not going to do anything about that. But if you watch film and you see your guys not boxing out, or not, the guards not coming around. I listened to your podcast with Zach Bovair, and you guys, was that you, or was that Chris Oliver? That was you, right?
He did one with me and one with Chris, but I think the rebounding one was Chris.
Rebounding one was Chris. Well, he did one with Chris Oliver, and it talked so much about rebounding. I love defensive rebounding. I think there's so much to it, and he kind of got into a lot of it. But the figuring out why they got 50% is so important, because you might have just got unlucky. The ball might have just bounced weird, or you might have just been lazy and forgot to, as a guard, fill in those lanes where, the loose balls ended up, or you might have just had your hands on the ball and not been tough enough because you weren't ready to play that day. So that's where the basketball knowledge comes in, having been around it and played it and coaching it. And you can't just be like, oh, they're a 30% offensive rebounding team, that's what they're going to get. No, you always want to do better than that, and you can do better than that if you're teaching how to do things to limit that number. And that's the really important thing about combining basketball and numbers. So it's not just either or, it's both, and they're both super important. So we'll watch film with our guys, and there's some rebounds that you did everything right, and the ball bounced weird. You can't get mad at those. Like, if somebody bricks a shot and it comes right back to the shooter, or forget about the shooter, it comes back to the guy getting back on D because it was such a bad shot, you can't say, oh, box the guy that's getting back. That'd be stupid, because 5% of the time it's going to go back to him, whereas 95% of the time you're going to be in the right spot. Well, that means about 1 out of 20 times you're going to look stupid. But I'll take the 19 out of 20 times where you get it right. So you've got to that's where the numbers can play a part in basketball. But you can't just forget about the things that limit those type opportunities, like forgetting to box out, or not crunching down, or not, as a guard, when your guy goes back, kind of getting in those gaps to get the rebound, because all those things will lead to that higher number, but not necessarily every time. If you do it right every time, that number is going to be limited. I guarantee it.
Right. Yeah. And no doubt. Yeah. I think I probably was going too far on the side of, like, everything is random. Obviously, you can just be bad at something in a game or a season. Yep. But that's right. Like you said, it's the film, it's the stats,
and emphasis. A lot of it's emphasis too, right? Like, like, I know we're really good. We have a couple of really good offensive rebounders, right? So when I watch film of them and they crash, I'm like, holy, like, they're awesome at getting to where they need to get to. So clearly, coming into our game, coaches are saying in practice the 2 days before, like, anytime they are even close to missing a box out, they're yelling at their players. So now that's in your mind. So in the game, you're a little bit more focused on it. So emphasis is huge when you're trying to limit another team's strength. That has nothing to do with numbers, but it'll help limit the numbers if you do it correctly. Whereas if you just go out and you're not ready, you're going to get killed in something like that.
Yeah. So lastly here, given your background and the numbers and the basketball side of things, I think it would be good to ask you about potential resources for people to learn more. So we talked about Chris Oliver's podcast. We talked about KenPom. Is there anything else out there that you are kind of locked in on?
Yeah, so you mentioned the big ones. I think your podcast and Chris Oliver's are terrific. There's so much good stuff in what you guys have. The guests always I always learn something new from them, and that's what it's all about, just kind of learning new stuff at all times. KenPom, if you haven't done this already, you should, but the articles that he writes are incredible, and you should go back like all the way to when he first started and read every single one of them, because the studies that he's done really answer a lot of the questions that anybody ever has. Like he's done, if it's like a statistical question, he's probably done something on it, but it goes back probably 10 years. And I have read every single one because I used to fiend for when he would put a new one out and read it. And now, of course, he's on The Athletic, so you do have to pay for it, but I still try and read every single one that he does. Some of the other sites that I really enjoy, like I follow on Twitter a bunch of guys. I'm trying to think, what's his name? Eric Haslam is a guy I think is pretty good with numbers. Nylon Calculus, I think you mentioned them. They have some great stuff, mainly on the NBA. Twitter's probably the best thing. Whenever somebody writes something analytical or statistical, I immediately follow them and look if they've done anything else. Zach Bovair puts out a thing on his Pick and Pop with kind of relevant articles, and that's really helpful because he kind of condenses everything. So those are like the things that I kind of follow and listen to constantly, just to try and further, see where the game's going, see if there's anything I'm missing, try and learn from whoever I can learn from.
Yeah, and I will add your podcast, of course, to that list too. Stat Chat. You can find it on iTunes. Yeah, there are a lot of really, really good episodes on there, and we've even had you had Zach Bovair on yours as well, right?
Yep.
And as well, you had Kyle Smith, who I had, and based some of my questions with him off of yours. Yeah, you had someone with the Houston Rockets as well. So let's end on this. I can't decide if I make too big of a deal out of this or not. Sometimes I think that stuff that's coming from the NBA isn't directly applicable to college, but you started out by saying with that baseline shot data that you're using is from the NBA. I would definitely be open to the fact that I'm overestimating. How comparable do you think Division I basketball and the NBA is?
Everything's relative, right? So clearly the ISO plays in the NBA aren't going to be what they are in college, although it all depends. I like the shot matrix because that's kind of the best in the world. So that's probably going to be a little bit higher than college. So that's kind of like your barometer of, okay, I can't really give more than what the NBA guys shoot, or, somebody like Dirk Nowitzki who shoots, I think he's like, when in his prime, not anymore, but like 55% from two. So no one can be as good as Dirk Nowitzki. So that's kind of the barometer I use. So I do think a lot of the things are applicable. I think it trickles down, but I think you kind of have to do your own kind of research, and Synergy has a lot of the numbers. And like I said, I think they're kind of accurate, not 100% accurate, but especially if you're a college coach, you got your own film. Like we're constantly doing studies and things based on our team to make sure that we're making the right decision, like you said. So like I'm in the middle of a rebounding one with our team that is like unbelievable, and I'll probably have a podcast about it soon, but I don't really want to give it away to our league just yet. But things like that, or you have your own film to kind of check, and if you have enough people working for you, have them do something you're interested in, or do it in the off season. But I do think you can always use the NBA numbers because there's so much out there that you can kind of use it as a barometer, maybe the low side or the high side, rather than being like, oh, it's definitely the same in college. So that's kind of how I use it.
Got it. Yeah. So at the very minimum, it's a starting point to to then do your own thing or what have you. So, all right, we will be on the lookout for the Stat Chat rebounding podcast for sure. And yeah, thank you so much for your time, Dave.
For sure, Jordan. This was fun, and like I said, I enjoy listening to your stuff. So keep it up, and great job.
No hand checking Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Tony Kukoc.